welcome to the CG Pro podcast. This is episode 77 with Jennifer McKnew, who I will introduce in a second. And if you've enjoyed the podcast today, you can follow us more in our free Facebook group or at becomecgpro.com. A couple of quick announcements before we start. We have an open day on September the 10th, this time with a Beetlejuice theme, which I'm really excited about. So you can come and meet us at CG Pro, see how a scene from Beetlejuice was made, or some fan art, if you like, of Beetlejuice. Meet the staff, meet our instructors, and meet other people who are into the same kind of stuff, making movies and computer graphics. Um, we have our Unreal for Filmmakers class starting on Sunday, which Jennifer was actually in one of the previous rounds. And with that said, I will introduce our wonderful guest for today. So Jennifer McKnew is a CG generalist and has done lots of work in some of the top studios in the world, like ILM and Sony Pictures, and all kinds of amazing studios on some incredible movies, like some of my favorites, like Saving Private Ryan and many other cool ones like I Am Legend. And anyway, the list goes on. It's a real pleasure to have you here today, Jennifer. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure being here, and I've been looking forward to this all week. Thank you for having me.
But I've absolutely been looking forward to it as well. So let's jump in. I've learned more things about you from preparing for this than I knew even when we met each other through the course. And you've done some incredible stuff with a really varied career, and I've worked in all kinds of cool things and some things that people might not expect as well. But I'd love to go back to how you got into all of this in the first place. Like, were there, especially to the sort of film side of what you've done, was that something you always wanted to do? Was there movies you saw as a kid that made you want to do what they were doing, or what was, did you study for it? What was your kind of path into all of this?
Well, my path actually had a kind of it was an interesting journey. It wasn't directly like I was either making films or anything like that as a little kid, but well, let's start with I am a Bay Area native. I grew up just north of the Golden Gate Bridge, and I grew up with like four significant people that were great influences in my life and actually did kind of pave my path. So I do think it's worth mentioning them. First, and this is in no particular order, but first would probably be my grandfather, Charles Rodney McNew. He was at the San Francisco School of Fine Arts, and I don't think that's in existence anymore, but there were some world famous abstract expressionist painters there while he was there. And he was discovered by this gentleman by the name of Walter Lander, who was later the founder of Lander and Associates. And for those that don't know, they're like the world renowned brand premier they've created the most recognized world's logos of some of the best known corporations like Coca-Cola, Levi Strauss, Del Monte, HP, FedEx, a bunch, just a whole bunch. But Walter discovered my grandfather there, and he ended up becoming, I think he was maybe the first designer or maybe the first associate there. But he later worked his way up the chain and was a senior vice president and also became an executive vice president. And they have companies all over the world. And it, I mean, anywhere from France, Italy, Singapore, Australia, Japan, you name it. But my grandfather, when I was in high school, opened up the Hong Kong office. But as a kid, I got to go to work with him and I was really into science fairs. Okay, I was in the Bay Area Science Fair. I've just kind of shown you that I'm a nerd. And I will say that I had the best displays because I went to work with my grandfather on the weekends a couple times. And it was really cool because, like all these logos, these world famous logos, I saw the artwork on the walls while we're there on the weekends. And he made me do the work, but he was teaching me the process. And he was kind of a mentor in a sense. He was leading me down the graphic design route. And he kind of thought he was a mentor that it looked like I was going to go that route. And my uncle did. But I think he was a bit baffled by my adventure into computer graphics, which I eventually went into. But he was a fine artist, and so I also loved painting and drawing with him whenever we were out at Stinson Beach visiting him. And I have to say he had like the first I called prototype Gen AI hands. He had this ballerina that is still to this day one of my favorite drawings that he's ever done, and I just would love doing charcoal drawings with him. And years later, I remember just telling him I was just admired this painting that he did. And he's like, have you ever noticed that it's actually got 6 fingers? This ballerina has 6 fingers. And so I kind of joke now it was like the prototype for Gen AI hands because they, some of them haven't quite mastered that. So, you know,
Maybe that's where they
he,
learned it from.
I guess so, or maybe he's the father of all that thinking. I don't know. He would get a kick out of that today. I'm certain of that. But I just also want to say that because I think it's important. I've had some really powerful female role models. My grandmother on my mother's side, she broke barriers. I mean, she qualified for the 1926 Olympics at the age of at 17. And by 19, I think she had like 278 first place medals. And so, I mean, she was a pacer swimmer for Johnny Weissmuller, who is like the original Tarzan. And I believe it to be true still, but I'm not sure. But she held the record swimming underneath the Golden Gate Bridge. And I think she did it like 36 minutes and 8 seconds. And even at that, this was many years ago, but back then, I mean, she was taking business classes. She was a woman way ahead of her time, and she was a trailblazer. So I had that kind of icon to look up to. But two additional women that are incredibly powerful and influences in my life would be my mom and my sister. My mom they both model like hard work and perseverance, and that anything you want to achieve, any dream, it just really requires a laser focus and working hard. And that became really apparent with my mom that after the age of 50, while I was working at ILM, she was working full time and she was going to night school at USF and to get her bachelor's degree. And then that wasn't enough. She got her master's degree, and just in a matter of years, she became CEO for like one of the leading Bay Area orthopedic firms. And she just never stopped aiming for the stars. And so you're never too old to achieve your dreams. That was another thing. And then there's my sister, like in tech. I just want to mention because she just is such an inspiration to me, and she's a deputy general counsel of regulatory affairs. She's a senior vice president, and she's like, yeah, it's general counsel of, I think it's regulatory affairs for Cisco Systems internationally. So she's like another just trailblazer. And then I think the last influence I just wanted to mention was my stepdad, because this became a theme. My sister's name was Leslie McKnew, by the way. I forgot to mention it. My mom's Kathleen Ebert. Um, but my stepdad, and the reason I wanted to mention him, because I just really think he modeled how to work in really stressful environments. He was one of the sergeants of the Golden Gate Bridge. He worked there for over 35 years. And kind of fun fact, I've been to the top twice, and it's unbelievable. Um, but at his retirement speech, I was working in LA and I came home to surprise him for it. But the, hearing the stories that people spoke about my dad, um, it just really left an impression on me. It was like an impactful moment. I got to learn parts of my dad that I never would have known. And from him, I really learned the value of kindness and how you treat people is like literally one of your greatest currencies. And what better time, I think, is our characters really revealed under stress. And as you know, that working in film and deadlines, whatnot, can be really stressful. So there's a theme you're going to hear when I work at DreamWorks that was modeled by him that came back and didn't even know it was like on a subconscious level, but I think it was him. So
Well, that's
that's kind of the
amazing.
early years.
A lot of very inspiring people, none of them in film. And
Yes.
I'm definitely curious what sparked that. But I'm also curious, how do you get to the top of the Golden Gate Bridge?
You-
Do you
Are
have
you,
to walk? Do you have to walk up the cable, or
no,
is
no,
it easier
no.
than that?
Well, you have to be taken up there by
Yeah, yeah,
someone
yeah.
that obviously works, and you can plan months and months in advance. And then literally the weather can change and they have to cancel that day, or the weather can change when you're up there. But it's like a 3-man elevator, and you get taken up. It takes about 10 minutes to get it's inside of one of the towers, and it takes about 10 minutes to get up the top. And you kind of come out, you pull up a ladder and you kind of come out this porthole at the very top. And between I say the sides of the towers, it's quite wide. And I mean, you could literally like spin around and kind of skip back and forth. I mean, there's definitely plenty of space. And but what is interesting is when you want to go to the sides of the tower, Um, the cables that are kind of long, that are like though the span of the bridge between the towers. You actually crawl underneath them on iron mesh, and so when you're looking down at the ground, you're seeing the cars below you, and there's like these railings with just two horizontal poles, and so you're holding on them for dear life, and you crawl underneath, and you kind of come out the sides, and that's where the magic. It's just it's so beautiful, but it's extremely windy, and so it's breathtaking. Now
That's,
it's incredible.
that sounds amazing and terrifying, and I'm going to Google what that looks like as soon as we're after the podcast. What? Tell me a little bit about. So you talked about some amazing influences that you had in your life, in your family. It sounds like a family of incredible people and overachievers, all of them. How did you? What took you down the film route?
That's a really good question. I would say, well, I made my way eventually to UCLA, and the biggest influence, no question, in computer graphics at UCLA was a professor. She was a visiting professor at the time, I think. Her name was Rebecca Allen, and she later became like the UCLA department. I think she's the founding chair of the Department of Design Media Art Lab. And she was out of RISD, Rhode Island School of Design, and either RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, where she got her master's, but I think it was MIT Media Lab. And she brought in guest speakers who were so cool, like Shelley Lake, who had just worked at digital productions, like on The Last Starfighter. And she brought these like really inspirational people in to talk. But back in that time, she was still even a legend. She was leaning into like cutting edge art forms. And she had just doing some kind of video project with Kraftwerk, the band, and she at the time, I think Lindy actually mentioned it. She was working on a project, but while I was going to UCLA, in her off hours, she was working on a Peter Gabriel project. But she collaborated with like countless artists, like Mark from Devo and John Paul Jones for Led Zeppelin and Joffrey Ballet. I mean, there were so many. And her artwork actually is part of a permanent collection in Paris, and I think the Whitney Museum and the Museum of Modern Art in New York. But and she went off. At the time when I was there, she hadn't. But later, she won an Emmy Award for like individual achievement for design. And she won an Emmy. And then I kind of was going down the traditional graphic design path. That's what I initially started in design at UCLA. And you know, my grandfather was kind of mentoring me, and I come home from school in summers, and we would powwow and nerd out about design. And then I started taking Rebecca's classes, and sorry, it became all about 2D and 3D, CGI all the way. So later in life, I was able to return as a guest lecturer there, and I enjoyed it. But for me, my knowledge of CG roles were women primarily, ironically, and then my primary examples were Rebecca Allen and Shelley Lake. And to me, this was normal. And that was kind of until I made that leap into my professional journey. So that's really what motivated me actually to make that leap into computer graphics.
Got it. Did you stay doing um, graphic design, or did you switch majors at that point to something else?
Well, it was design. You could kind of just focus your classes. It was a very impactful program. It was really hard to get into. In fact, you could be at the university and you wanted to petition to change your major. In some quarters, you could petition to get it, and you have a portfolio and everything. You already in the school, you clearly have the GPA, and then all of a sudden at the last minute, no, we're not accepting it. It's so impacted. We're not going to let anybody petition in this major this quarter. So some quarters 0, some 1 to 3. And I think it was my third attempt. So how's that saying go? If you don't succeed, try again. And so my gamble of I actually was originally an English major, but the quarter that I came in, they weren't accepting transfer. Had transferred into UCLA, and they were not accepting design majors to into at that quarter. So I kind of gambled the deck by transferring from English into design. Eventually got in.
I have one question which I also had that came up as you were talking about your grandfather. I think it was the graphic designer who did the Coke logo. Because there's a lot of like mystery around
He
that.
didn't do that, but their firm, I think, was involved with all of the
Oh,
branding
okay,
of Coca-Cola. Yeah.
got it. there's interesting how much kind of folklore there is around that logo and around the things that people read into it, the little man's head and the
I
whatever, you
heard
know.
that. Oh, interesting. I haven't
Well,
heard that.
I'll tell you about it later. But I
Okay,
was going to ask if you knew anything about it.
I don't.
Anyway, skipping on a step to you're at UCLA, and what happened after that? How did you get your first break? What happened? What was the moment that changed it from being a student to being in this industry?
Gotcha. Okay. So, well, I was really loving computer graphics, and I do have one 0.0 prototype. I did my first film, actually hand drawn animation, frame by frame. Actually, I drew it digitally though, and compiled it all together. Made it. I'll have to tell you, but I was remembering it later. I completely forgot it, and that it was like to the soundtrack of Herbie Hancock Rocket in
Oh,
college.
cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, very cool.
but so I did a bit of animation there too. But I was my first break is I got my first job right out of school. I was working for a gentleman by the name of Dave Fisk at Animagic, and he owned it. And just remember being so excited to have my first job. I even offered to work for free. How nuts is that? But honestly, if you do something you love, you never work a day of your life. And I was like, oh no, don't worry about it. Because I thought it was an internship, but he's like, no, I'm going to pay you. Um, but he hired me basically to do kind of start doing previs. His company was a boutique shop that a lot of the studios and the title houses would send the artwork to. And then he had the cameras, the downshooters, I think they were Oxbury cameras, that he would shoot these opening credits for opening titles, main titles for movies and the rolling credits and whatnot. But he kind of wanted to start showing his, his clients movement and animation of these titles, and he thought it was like a way to pre-visit in a sense. So I was kind of doing that on the side. I was starting to do all these things that he was kind of ideas that he had, and it was just playing with it. And after work, I stayed late, and I kind of was training myself in 3D. And the first thing I literally set for myself to build, it's nuts, is a human head. And this is pre-NURBS, pre-sub-D modeling. I did it all in Sculpt 4D, a polygonal modeler in the Amiga. And but I just kind of did the 3D stuff after work. Animagic was later purchased by Cinema Research Corporation, and I remember Dave when he sat me down. I was absolutely crushed that he had sold the company, but he said, "Have a plan, so stay tuned." And he did follow through with it. So Cinema Research Corporation, it was also known as CRC, was much like Pack Title. I know that Adam Howard had talked about it. They were a large scale title house that did like tentpole films, the main credits and whatnot. And they hired him to be in management and operations. And he had me brought on as a title designer's assistant, a gentleman by the name of Neil Thompson. And I was going to be basically a paste up artist. I was going to be cutting out all the artwork and getting it all ready for camera, getting it all ready to shoot on the downshooter or the Oxbury. And I think it was an Oxbury. But I knew I was pretty much better cut out for CG because one time I was like cutting the artwork, getting it all ready to paste up, and I was using a plastic ruler and X-Acto blade, and went off the top of my finger. I cut the top of my finger, so clearly, no pun intended, I wasn't really cut out for CG. And but I always kept
It's
my
good
eye on the
motivation to get into computers. They're a lot safer in some ways, maybe not so good for your posture. But
a
um,
lot. Yeah. But then I
so
started to I was training in like I was working on the Amiga and I started like working in Lightwave. And so I can go into that if you want.
yeah, well, so I'm definitely curious about that. Also I'm curious about what CG was like at that moment. But how did it kind of how did you progress through it to become more like you've progressed with as the industry progressed, and at that
I
point, I think
did.
it was fairly rudimentary in terms of what we could do with computer graphics. But what was the what was the path like through the kind of evolution of computer graphics?
That's a really good question. Well, it was at the very early days of a Lightwave, which was part of the video toaster. I think I had video toaster board number 150. It was like really early days, and I got to know the whole new tech crew. And I mean, I went all in. I was staying after hours, learning everything I could, and I would go to NAB and SIGGRAPH. And the early days were really exciting because they were actually really great at hearing tools. Like, oh, this would be really cool. And I knew a lot of the tech team, and I would make suggestions and vice versa. Like, oh, try this. They would have me beta test stuff, and that was exciting. But then the new tech folks introduced me to a gentleman by the name of Joe Conti, and at the time, he was putting a CG team together, Apogee Productions, which, for those who don't know, that's where the original Star Wars was shot. And the legendary visual effects supervisor, John Dykstra, was there. And Joe was putting together kind of a CG team within the art department. In the art department, the person was at the helm was James Hagedis. And there I got to work on some CG projects like Unsolved Mysteries, where I got to work on UFOs. I think I created like 5 UFO. I worked on 5 different episodes of UFOs for Unsolved Mysteries, and I was under the VFX supervision of Tim McHugh, and he was internal at Apogee. So I just think I want to mention, because there's people in your life that absolutely change the trajectory of your life. And Tim McHugh is at the very top. And he is one of those individuals that really became an advocate for women in CG. And as I'm talking, if it's okay with you, I'd like to shine a light on people who empower women. This is a really transformative time. And I really want to talk
Yes.
about people who empower women in CG. And to this day, I will tell you that Tim McHugh, he was supervising me on our projects at Apogee. He went out of his way to make sure that I was included and to be a voice and an advocate. He literally, I remember he told me years later that someone said in a meeting that he was kind of presenting what was going to be going on for the production, and he said, "I'm going to bring Jennifer." And it's, well, what's Jennifer doing? Is she going to take notes? And Tim's like, no, she's doing the work. So it was a teachable moment for him, and I will always be thankful. But he also included me in all these in the post sessions where we would go to the post group, and there we would do all the online editing. And he introduced me to, as I was finishing up on the projects, he introduced me to another gentleman by the name of Peter Moyer. And Peter was just, he was at the time an online editor. And to clarify, like, the post group at that time was like the premier post production facility. And it was even like preceded Digital Magic and Pacific Ocean Post. I know that Adam talked about that. And I can cover that later. But Adam and I actually worked together at Pacific Ocean Post, and he's a legend. Um, but the time, the Post Group was doing like the Star Trek VFX, and they were doing commercials and music videos with like Michael Jackson and MC Hammer and Prince. It was not uncommon for Prince to be working in the office right behind me. That was kind of fun.
Cool.
But Peter later contacted, I was still at Apogee, and he contacted me, and he said, "Hey, the person that's running the electronic art department is leaving." And he said, asked me if I would be interested in taking that role. And I was like, yes, absolutely. And the electronic art department literally kind of supplied a lot of the artwork and sometimes animations, 3D, for a lot of the online edit bays. So there I got to work directly with clients. Like, they literally sitting right beside me while I'm working away. And I got to work on the first episode of X Files with Matt Beck, and it was really cool because I also was bidding my own work, and I could see, because they kind of went through an interesting route how they would book me through the management. And so I could see when one project would be finishing up. So I would contact Matt Beck, and I'm like, "Hey, Matt, I'm going to be seeing my schedule free up a little bit. Can you send me some boards? I want to bid them." And he brought me tons of work, and I really appreciate that. But I got to work on
Kinds of
commercials and show
what kinds
openings
of
too.
work were you what kinds of work are you describing? What's the activity like? Is it making 3D, doing
Oh yeah.
modeling, doing
Well, yeah, absolutely. That actually led me to some, probably the person that really did like kind of take my career into a different direction was, I was doing, there was this design team, Bob Gutierrez and Kelly Shelley, and they gave me so much work in terms of 3D, like the American Music Awards. I had to model all these instruments, And all the keys would play on an instrument and the camera would fly around and like go into one of the keys and it would introduce like a category like best R&B female. And I have some philosophies with like I think that television, because the deadlines are so quick, are such quick turnarounds, and I think of feature film visual effects is like oil painting because you have time to nuance it. But Kelly Shelley and Bob Gutierrez, they brought me the Emmy Awards too. I did the opening for the Emmy Awards a couple of years. A 3D statue flew around, and like the little spheres would travel around the globe and kick lens flares. Let's see, but they provided me so many opportunities, and I actually got to become a member of the Television Academy and vote on the Emmy Awards at daytime and primetime because of them. And it was the amount of work. I mean, we did the American Music Awards a couple of years in a row, and I think the Emmy Awards as well. So that was fun. But then I actually was just kind of interesting, and a lot of people don't know, I then, while I was working away at the art department, on the electronic art department at the Post Group, uh, Joe had been setting up a team at Universal Amblin Entertainment for a TV show called Sequest DSV. And I kind of got to be on loan for the first year. I think the pilot and first 5 episodes. So I got to join the team, and it was really cool. It's a Spielberg project. And what people don't know is the pilot for Sequest DSV was director Irvin Kershner, who directed Empire Strikes Back. And so we got to work directly with him, and we had a great cast. Roy Scheider was in it, and it was back then. It was like science in the sea. It was just all scientifically based. A lot of it was a drama, but they even brought in Bob Ballard, who discovered the original Titanic, to talk to us and kind of be a sorts of truth, like we were saying, in the realm of things that would be accurate. So that was really fun. That was a great crew, and I really enjoyed it. I did end up returning to the Post Group, though.
Amazing. Like a lot of iconic shows and award ceremonies. Great to hear about what kinds of things you were doing. What kind of programs were you using at that point? What kinds of software and tools?
At that time, I was working in Lightwave. I was working in Electric Image, and then I made the full-on move to Alias Power Animator. Do you remember that?
Yep, the precursor to Maya.
Exactly, exactly. So, and they were Peter Moyer was building a film division at the Post Group, and I got to work with their, was it? Yeah, it was there. I got to work with Clive Barker on Lord of, no, was it? Yeah, it was a Post Group. It was a of Illusions. And for those who don't know, he directed Hellraiser. He was a super nice guy, he loves to work with artists. He was incredible to just sits right beside you and you're drawing away. And like this, I learned about origami. That was fun. But at the time, then I was really starting to fall in love with working in film, because working in television, you have, like I said earlier, it's like acrylic paint. It's got to dry fast. You got to work. You got to be streamlined. You got to be efficient. It's going on the air. You are lucky if you get 2 takes. Um, with film, it was just a little longer. You could, finesse it. You have a little more time to nuance things. So I was recruited to join the Pacific Ocean Post, and a gentleman by the name of Alan Kozlowski was one of the co-founders, and he was just an artist at heart, and he was a really incredible person. In fact, I remember walking into his office when I just met him. He was like playing the guitar, and it was shortly thereafter I kind of learned about how rooted into music he was. He was actually really good friends with George Harrison, and that was a fun day when George Harrison came into work in our
That's cool.
offices. Yeah. But this is where I kind of start to cross paths with Adam Howard. Um, I had just finished up. I got recruited by a POP, and I had to do this like kind of still had a television mentality with how quick it turned around. But I was working on this Dolby digital theatrical trailer that was like in front of Batman, that you're going to fly through Dolby City. It's really cool. But then these 2 gentlemen from Digital Magic were hired, and they came on, and they were on the 5th floor, and it was the legendary Adam Howard and Scott Rader. And I don't know, I can't even remember if they mentioned, but they have like a carload of Emmy Awards they've won. I mean, a truckload, well deserved. and they tapped me actually for to work on a project with them, which was a Star Trek Voyager, where I got to do these baby alligator creatures that kind of slithered across the rocks and into this little creek bed, splashing water. It was really cool. And I was using Alias Power Animator back in those days. And they actually made it incredible. They took me to Paramount. What a fun set that was to go on. And it was incredible. In fact, I think Adam did all the compositing of all of it. I think it looked better than the original, like puppets, the parents that were alongside these little baby creatures. They got me all the cyber scan data, all the textures, everything. And we actually turned it around pretty quick. And it was fun. And so I got to work on other projects there back in the film division. I think I worked on a Hellraiser and still worked on TV. I did a Deep Space Nine episode. Um, but POP, Pacific Ocean Post, actually brought in Roland Emmerich's crew, Centropolis, to work on Independence Day. And they were in the office right next to me. They were beefing up. They hired Pacific Ocean Post to do a lot of the compositing, but they had their 3D crew already. And I was already committed to projects with clients and whatnot. But I kind of felt like I was, an outward extension. I knew what was going on all the time. They were in the offices right next to me. Great crew. But the compositing crew grew, and that's when new stars like Pablo Hellman joined from Digital Domain. Had just worked on, I think, Apollo 13, and the Littleton brothers from Cinesite. But as the crew grew, they started bringing in like a Stan Smansky to run the film division, and he's another, by the way, I have to just mention, huge advocate for women in CG roles. And I think ID4, he kind of wrangled that ship and got it all together for them to deliver that show. There was so much work. But after Independence Day finished up, Pablo went to ILM. And I was actually working on some pre-production for we were bidding the show, Volcano. And I was working with some Dreamcast artists that had come on board. But I kept in touch. And then Pablo brought me on to ILM. And so I will always be forever grateful. And so is my mom, because I got to return to the Bay Area. So that was my journey to ILM.
What was the first thing that you did at ILM?
Well, that's really, really cool story, actually. The very first show that I worked on was Men in Black. And remember, this kind of comes back to what I was mentioning about how kindness and you know just doing thoughtful things for people kind of came back with my dad. Tim McHugh had introduced me to a gentleman by the name of Eric Brevik, who he worked with at DreamQuest Images. And he said, "Hey, one of those times you go back up and see your folks." This is while we were working at Apogee. Let me know, and I'll connect you with Eric Brevik, and maybe he can give you a tour, and you can meet him. And so I had. Fast forward like 5, 6 years later, who is the visual effects supervisor but Eric Brevik? And I remember he came over to my desk one day. I don't know, maybe it was my first turnover on a shot. And I just said, "Hi, my name's Jennifer. I don't know if you remember me, but I met you through Tim McHugh." True story. He said to me, "Wait a minute, are you the person that wrote me a thank you note?" He remembered that all these years. And it was just like the impact of showing genuine gratitude to someone. They didn't forget it. And yeah, so that was pretty cool. But there I got to work on so many incredible projects with so many outstanding individuals. And there was a lot of really notable women, I have to say. Like my very first friend at ILM was Natasha DeVoe. And I remember coming back to my office and telling David Menny, "I just met another female technical director." I was a lighting technical director then. And I remember his first response was, "Everything she touches turns to gold." It's true. But like Lindy DeQuatro, I mean, I got to work, we were technical directors together, and I don't remember if she mentioned, but she's been nominated for a BAFTA for Pacific Rim, and she's been to the Oscar Bake Off. I mean, she's never been nominated for a VFX Oscar, and it's time, people. She needs to be nominated, and she needs to win. She's brilliant. She's so accomplished, and so we were TDs back then together, and Kim Ross, Lila Chesloff, Amanda Renee. And then I got to work with other really incredibly powerful and accomplished women in other roles. Pamela Jarvis with Pamela Hobbs back then, and matte painting, and Jean Bolte. So it was a time where there was some really groundbreaking trailblazing women at ILM. and I will be all forever grateful for my experience to be able to work with them. But at ILM, I would say my favorite project by far, no question about it, and it was just from a historical standpoint alone, was Saving Private Ryan. And I was one of the people that got to. I was the technical director on the reveal of Normandy Beach, and
Wow.
that was, yeah, that was one of my shots. And Pablo Roger Guyette was the visual effects supervisor. And Pablo Hellman, you remember Pablo from Pacific Ocean Post? He was a compositing supervisor, and Alex Laurent was the art director. And they were just, it was a small crew on that show, but boy, did we create some powerful imagery
You
that
certainly
like
did. I will never forget it, being in the theater and seeing that, and the sound in it as well was just
right,
next level. It's so immersive, such an immersive movie. And
totally.
yeah, and to echo what you said, I working at ILM myself, I had a female supervisor, Kyori Ogino. The creature effects department was fantastic. Manager was a woman as well, and some incredible women. My wife is an incredible compositor who worked at ILM, and I'm you're obviously very passionate about that subject, as are we, because we run a non-profit that's committed to helping females into the industry or in the industry, but also people from different backgrounds as well. Um,
Absolutely.
I'm curious if you have any thoughts on how, because we've both been in the industry. We know there's a lot. There's too much of a bias towards men being in the industry. Do you think that there's anything? I asked Lindy the same question. Anything that any good suggestions for people wanting to get into the industry or people who run parts of the industry to kind of improve the balance?
Oh, to improve, well, I think it starts with people talking about it and people being advocates on behalf of women, like the Tim McHughes. And actually, another person that actually, it's kind of currently what I'm working on right now is John Schlag. And I can talk about my time working at Sony, but he was a special project visual effects supervisor at Sony Pictures, and I worked in their satellite office. And he went out of his way to make sure producers knew what I was working on, because I was like, we weren't in the Culver City office, and he was an advocate for me to work. They trained me in a lot of the tools when I came on board at Sony. Um, I had to learn all the proprietary lighting tools, and I was a texture painter there, as well as a map painter. So they could just like plug me in like a Swiss Army knife wherever it was bottlenecked. And he was a great advocate, and he had zero tolerance for anybody that thought I wouldn't understand something. He like, she was a technical director. He is one of the most incredible advocates for women. So I think it comes with um, changing. In fact, actually, before he left, and he never, that saying, "Do good, don't tell." John did something for me that I will never forget. And it's this kind of thing when I think people speaking on behalf of very accomplished by virtue of their talents alone. But I got a call from management at Sony one day, and I was told that I'd been awarded a Sony Pictures Applause Award. And I'm like, well, A, what is that? And how did this happen? And they said it was something like for lasting contribution to Sony Pictures. And I found out later it was John Schlag. And I will always be forever grateful. But he literally kind of, before he logged out, closed the door and left. That's the last thing he did before he left. So it's like, I think, how do we make these changes is having people like yourself, men and women. Women celebrate other women in these roles, but also men going out of their way and say, oh, I mean, Lindy is so accomplished. There's no question that she is like one of the leading visual effects supervisors. And I am, in my lifetime, I want Lindy to have an Oscar. I really do. So it's just more the awareness, that we just speak about it and we share the knowledge. And what John did is like, well, did you know that she can map paint and she can also light? It's people going out and speaking on your behalf and being advocates.
I think it's fantastic that you're talking about it and sharing it through this podcast as well. So one great way to know, I think, that it's possible for some people is just to know how many people have done it and do it. And my supervisor, one of my supervisors on The Lion King, was Audrey Ferrara, amazing woman. She's moved on to be the visual effects supervisor. At that point, she was DFX supervisor or the VAD supervisor. and she's moved on to be the visual effects supervisor of the most recent um, Lion King, Mufasa, the Lion King, which has just had a trailer come out. So yeah, really very, very behind the course, if you like. But yeah, just interested to know. Excuse me, losing my voice apparently. I'm interested to know what if there's any other thoughts that you have on empowering women to make the decisions that it takes to go into this industry or do the things that it takes, or whether it's on both sides of encouraging people into the right types of education, or if whether it's changes we have to make in the industry.
Well, I think it's actually even starts young earlier. I mean, when I was at ILM, a bunch of us would go to College of Marin, and they do these career days for girls to get into math and science careers. And so I would partake in that. And there was also a one when I was working at DreamWorks that I would lend a helping hand and be a lecturer was Tech Girls. It was kind of a STEM program thing to a program to encourage girls to get into math and science careers. So I think it even starts at a younger age to start to kind of empower them by educating them, to showing these things. You can do this. This is a really transformative time in the world, and I think both in our tools and our culture um, and I think people being put in positions to elevate women in these roles. So just in terms of like studying, I mean, I find what if there's a specific niche that you're interested in. I think internships are great, um, but taking classes and really focusing and then creating projects and always leveling up your skill sets. I work very hard to maintain multiple skill sets, and I'm trying to stay up on cutting edge materials and software packages. That's how I met you
Yep.
through
Well,
your
tell
program.
us tell us about that. Tell us about how we met,
Uh,
and I'd love to hear a little bit more about as well about the incredible project that came from it as well.
okay. Well, prior to that, I should connect. Is it okay if I just talk? Because it kind of led me to that. Is it okay if I
Yeah.
talk about tech?
Yes.
Okay. So I was working in film, and I had also worked at DreamWorks with was on the map painting team. I worked under the supervision at PDI as well as in Glendale. But I worked with Pamela Jarvis, Pamela Hobbs, is her main name. But she just is another incredible pioneer, and I learned a lot how to see things aesthetically from Pamela. So I left DreamWorks, and I got the call. I got tapped into working in tech. And I was working in the autonomous vehicle space for a company by the name of Cruise, and the mothership is GM. And I loved it. I actually found something I was part of something that was like solving the greatest engineering challenge of our generation. And it had to be a lot to take me away from film and visual effects and animation. I love that too. But I kind of like thought, wow, this is an interesting leap for me to take. And I ended up working in the product org under the design umbrella, but on the brand design team. And there I was able kind of to tap into my background in visual effects and animation, using like cinematic magic to create storytelling elements for product design, brand design, marketing, and engineering teams. But in order to do that and to be successful and create any kind of visual content that was impactful, I decided to kind of understand how the technology worked under the hood, no pun intended. And so much so that I kind of really I kind of tapped back into my science days, and I got really involved in patents. And in fact, in the autonomous vehicle space, under Cruise, I have 5 granted patents to date as a named inventor. One I'm a sole inventor, another one's I'm a co-inventor, but I have numerous ones that are several pending co-inventor with some of my team. But that just kind of wanting to understand, like at a technical level, that literally made it possible for me to do better work and create visual content and kind of tap into that film background. And when I was there, again, women in tech roles were something that I was hoping to see more of. And I ended up at a company that it was incredibly supportive. And John Barreto probably is one of the greatest advocates for empowering women in tech that I have come across. And he encouraged me when you asked about how do we make these transformation. He encouraged me to put my work out there to the company. He wanted to create that awareness so they knew where the work was actually coming from. And this is like internally. And I can't thank him enough for that. And he's to this date one of the best leaders in design space and in tech space. As far as I'm concerned, he deserves so many accolades. But after Cruise, um, I left Cruise, and I decided that it was really time to level up and kind of look at, okay, where can I improve? And there was a lot of transformative times happening in the tech space with generative AI and whatnot. But I decided to level up, and I wanted to learn Unreal Engine for filmmakers. And so I saw the course, I started looking at the background, and Brian LaFrance and I, who worked at ILM together, we kind of collaborated and talked like, yeah, this is a really good program. So we both took the class, enjoyed it. It was outstanding. Can't recommend it enough. I dove in. It was the Unreal Engine for Filmmakers course, and I dove into all the modules, like everything from environments to rigging to character animation to lighting. I mean, everything, even from blocking it out from the very beginning. And I even actually took a step further. I wrote a script, like a screen treatment, and I actually registered it with the Writers Guild. I don't know if you know that, Ed, but I even took it. I
Yes, I
wanted
remember you
the
told me. Yeah,
the full
amazing.
experience. So, and I was able to create this little short film. And if it wasn't for you, I never would have had that opportunity. Um, the instruction, the level of instruction was superb. I mean, I really, really pushed myself. Um, and I ended up coming out of this class creating a 4.5 minute short film while I was learning the software. And it might have been had some caffeine or two, a little bit along the way, because there were some long hours. But I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it.
Well, the evidence of that is in the film. Tell us a little bit about Sydney and Socket.
Okay. Well, I'm really passionate about it because it kind of came out from right after we had just come out of COVID, and a lot of people were kind of really lonely during the time of being like full isolation. So it's kind of the tale of two misfits that have been left behind by society, and unexpectedly their paths cross, like, and they form this indelible friendship. Wanted to push myself because 93% of communication is nonverbal. So how can I tell a story without words on the screen, or spoken words? So no text, no spoken word. So I wanted to tell a nonverbal story that basically transcended cultural and language barriers, but I wanted to illustrate the universal importance of connection. um, I wanted to also shine a light on the beauty of diversity and inclusion. I think that's got a kind of negative rap right now. Um, it can, but I wanted to showcase that there's these two distinctively different beings, a graceful swan and a rusted robot, and they're kind of both outcasts in their own right. But they form this unlikely bond. I mean, the swan cannot fly and the sockets have been kind of deemed unproductive, and they've been abandoned by their respective communities, and they believe themselves to be alone in the world, and they've discovered this like unexpected magic in finding and forming kind of a new beautiful community together. And it really is to instill hope uh, and to instill a little bit of hope in those that feel the weight of solitude. But there's a component, and there's stuff you probably I never shared with you, but there's a component of the story that kind of touches in technology, that it's all about technology that becomes obsolete. And I was kind of relating to Socket because I know that he'd been thought that he had been left behind. Technology's changing, and I just wanted to kind of have a symbolic character that was like artists. As artists, we are never obsolete, and our extensively trained eyes and our experiences are the soul to tech. And I just kind of wanted to touch on that. But the part that you may not know is that I drew inspiration from two pretty cool films. I drew inspiration in this project from ET and Wally. And ET, like if you notice, like ET, when the light is used as kind of a life force. When ET's alive, his finger lights up, right? Well, much like Socket, when he had been deemed unproductive and he'd been left behind in this desolate area, his belly lights off. And Sydney, this one kind of brings him back to life, kind of like what Elliot did with ET and ET did with, they kind of like were each other's, they drew life from each other. And But ET's finger would come on. And then, but also like Wally, Sokka had been left behind and tossed away, is like set aside as, and that was the kind of the tech component that I was kind of referring to. But I did use light also. I think it's worth noting. I kind of used it as a supporting character in a way to support the narrative. There's a scene where Sydney's kind of wandering aimlessly through the forest, and all in one scene, I kind of wanted to show that hopelessness where it basically the days turns into night slowly. You see the cast shadows go across the frame, and the light was a way, a nonverbal way to convey the story's emotion, kind of employing light, using it as a mirror to Sydney, the swan's internal world. Like it was, as light was turning into darkness, it was kind of indicative of the despair that Sydney was feeling. So that's at a high level.
Amazing. Well, I thoroughly recommend to any everybody who's listening to this to go check out the film. We'll share some links of how to do that. To tell us a little bit what happened next, because this was quite extraordinary. I know that it's gone out.
Oh,
You submitted it to a lot of film festivals, and then we also have a couple of questions that I want to touch on that are coming from the audience. But tell us what happened next for
okay.
Sydney and Crockett.
Oh, excellent. Well, it was, I hadn't even thought of this, to be quite honest. But during the film, and I was, it would be collaborating with my great people, students in that class as well, and they were incredibly talented. And I remember Brian LaFrance mentioning you should toss us into some film festivals. That hadn't even occurred to me, and neither had I mean Jackie even and I were talking about it, and I had never occurred to me. So after I finished the film, and again, I would love to go in and do like a 2.0 Sydney and Socket, but I created all this like soup to nuts, concept to completion, um, in what 7 or 8 weeks. And afterwards, I put it into this film festival world, and I received over 600 invitations for entry consideration. Doesn't mean that it's actually in the festival, um, but once I reviewed it, and if somebody wants you, they can offer you a waiver fee reduction, or even a waiver of removal altogether. And I received numerous, like even waivers, like no waiver. I mean, full waiver. You just submit it. And so I chose very intentionally the festivals that I wanted it to be part of, because I wanted to see where my message would be the most impactful. So I recently found out that it's been accepted in the Oxford Short Film Festival in the UK. It'll be at Oxford University in the next couple of weeks. And ironically, I am going to be competing in the same category with a dear friend that I worked with at ILM, Alan Rosenfeld. Where our films are in the same category, but I am cheering for him 100%, because he is actually another great advocate for women, empowering women in CG roles, and he was the one who taught me the film festival ropes. So I'm very grateful. But yeah, it's gotten so there's I'm still waiting for some results because some of them were delayed, but so far it's won recognition in, I think, Rome International Film Festival, and then was it Minefield, which is out of Albuquerque. Then it got an honorable mention in Greece, and then the Crown Point International Film Festival out of Chicago. It won some awards, and then the Los Angeles International Short Film Festival. It was a semifinalist, and then in Independent Short Awards out of LA. Both of those last two are very competitive. It got honorable mention for best first time female director. So there's more to come, hopefully. So that's just the beginning. But thank you.
You bet. Thank you. You did some great work there, and it deserves it. It was just amazing to see them continuing to come in. You know, the the inspiration, I think, for everybody else to do the things that you did, to register the script, to submit. If you don't submit things, then nobody knows about it. That side of it is important, as well as making a great film. So I really enjoyed hearing about that every time that you speak about it, because I think it's very inspiring to people to know that it's one thing to make something cool, but you got to share it with the world. You got to give them
Oh,
that
thank you.
gift.
Thank
I
you.
We have a few questions here before the end of the show today, so I want to make sure that we get to at least a
Sure.
few of them. Um, so one question here is, how did you manage to be a VFX artist Swiss Army knife that people could trust with all these different roles. Someone says one of the biggest struggles I've had as a generalist is that it's often assumed that I don't know what I'm talking about.
That's a very good question. Well, back in the day, actually, you kind of were, and I know Lindy touched on it too. You kind of were a generalist. You got a shot and you took it from getting the start and then delivering it. So you were doing all parts of it. So I kind of had an overview. I tend to like completely nerd out and read a manual from. I I, I want to know every facet of how something comes together with creating visual content. But I back then had the opportunity because that was kind of what was expected. Okay, and then as productions grew in film, they got more shots and more shots. We had more finite and more focused roles. At ILM, I was hired as a lighting technical director, and I was concerned actually that I would lose some of my other skill sets. So I think my suggestion would be is if you want to break out of just being seen in one role, maybe create projects on the own. Maybe do your own short film. Maybe do create something that displays and demonstrates an excellence of other areas that you can contribute to. I mean, there's nothing better than show don't tell. So that would be maybe a suggestion. I've seen it kind of come back, and map painters now or environment artists, you kind of do the entire scene. So you might be compositing and you may be doing like the roiling of your own clouds, um, or you maybe add a waterfall and do the particles in your shot. So some of these roles are become more generalist. I've just worked very hard to kind of like maintain those. I do and studying all the time. Actually, when I was trying to making that leap into becoming map painting, I would get up every day before work, and I would like study for 2 hours, an hour or two, truthfully. And then I, became well versed, and this was actually after ILM. I really got into that. So and I enjoyed it. And go see. It depends on the role, but it's I think to be a student of the world, go to museums, look at art. I mean, there's so much that you can learn just by looking at some of the masters and emulating some of that in your work, and just using it for inspiration. Does that answer the
Great
question?
advice. Hopefully so. I think it's great advice personally in keeping your passion alive, continuing to grow your
Sure.
skills as you've done through your career. Now, the world is changing and it always changes. There's no been a time in the world when it's not been changing, and keeping up to date with your skill sets like you have, learning new things. And now we're wandering into this new era through real-time computer graphics and into
Mhm.
the generative AI phase, whatever that's going to resolve as. And it's it's important to keeping up with everything and to keep the
Absolutely.
passion alive. Yeah,
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think even with that is it is seemingly I definitely it's a sensitive topic and I try to look at it through both sides of the lens and be mindful. It's a little disruptive, but it's also transformative. First and foremost, with in terms of like generative AI, I supported it within the ethical frameworks, of course, and using it responsibly and within the legal and ethical safety frameworks. And to me that's imperative and no ceiling from artists. But I think Adam actually addressed this really brilliantly. He kind of said like we're going to be okay, folks, and I agree with him. I don't I think everything is always changing. There's nothing that's ever constant. If we didn't evolve, we wouldn't grow as a society, right? And if I had that approach, then I never would have made a career in CG, right? Everything would have been like the traditional way that filmmaking was done. Matte painters would still be painting on glass. Digital
you'll
matte
still be
would
in caves.
there you go. But in my opinion, I really do believe that we are artists. We will never be obsolete, and are actually here's something I hadn't thought of, but our extensively trained eye, having worked in this field for so many years, and our lived experiences are kind of like the soul to tech. They need us, and our imaginations will be even more limitless. Will be even more productive, and I think we'll be able to take because of our background take any generative AI, we'll be able to push it and take it to new levels because of what we can do. We know that we have that pixel level of focus, pixel level of control, and I think we can push it and even take it to other places. I think I'm hopeful, and but I think that creatives will always be the conversation at the table. I do.
I totally agree with you. I think all of it has to be driven by artists. Not to say that people who don't have experience can't still make cool stuff, but you've got to know what it is that you're asking for in the first place and whether it succeeded after the process. So, and that's to me, that's being an artist and having that sensibility and having that eye and having the understanding of what it is you're trying to accomplish. Um,
Yeah, for sure.
I totally agree. I'm an optimist as well, so I would think like that. What another question is what's the favorite shot you ever worked on and why?
Oh, well, that probably would be the reveal of Normandy Beach on Saving Private Ryan. Uh, that was just an entire fun crew, but it was an empty beach when I started, and having it, I got to learn a lot from a historical standpoint. Alex Laurent would bring all this historical research, and I never knew like the barrage balloons. I got to actually animate on that shot as well. I got to and see there's a perfect example where I was a lighting technical director, but they allowed me to. I did some pre-comping on that shot, and it ended up going to their high-speed compositor for the ultimate, the final was Caitlin Conton, I think, and Pablo Hellman were doing the compositing on that. And I got to have like there's little emergency vehicles like driving in the sand, jeeps and ambulances, and they're leaving tracks. But I got to learn, I didn't know, but the barrage balloons that were in along the beach, they had these big tethers that would go down the ground. I had no idea why. And I got to learn by virtue of working on this, that's how they kept enemy aircraft from coming in. And so that was fun. And then Matt Hendershot did some of the matte paintings back in the ships in the background. And then even down, I got to really get into some procedural stuff because there was like whitewater around all the little LCBP and LST boats. Isn't that crazy that I still remember all this? I even know the shot name, but but
But you worked
you know,
that hard, you remember it.
yeah, absolutely. I was on that shot for a while, and then I got to do some tracer fire stuff too, which was uh, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work, but I was doing a lot of the compositing on that as well. But yeah, that would probably be just probably it is one of my favorite because of what that movie stands for, and that it's forever embedded in film history and the impact that it left. So there's that.
Yeah. Impactful movement, so much learning by the sounds of it as well. That's always
Yeah,
something I think that makes you when my only time in my career when my passion dropped was when I took my foot off the gas in terms of learning. And I
right.
put that together and like learning is really, really important, not just to stay relevant, but also for your passion and enthusiasm about what you're doing. If you're not growing, you stop enjoying what you're doing. I've proved that
100%.
myself a
Yeah,
few times.
yeah.
Cool. What somebody else asked, what's the next film you're going to direct?
Well, well, I have all of these ideas. I'm actually working right now on a project, but I am just doing matte painting. Uh, I'm working with John Schlag from John was at Sony Pictures that I was mentioning, but he also was at ILM. I think he even has a technical Oscar. I mean, he's like a genius. Um, but I'm actually currently not working on my own film, though I have some ideas. I'm always jotting down things. If I have a dream, I'll write it down right away so it's fresh and never forget. So I'll kind of plan and plot that out. But right now, I'm currently doing some matte painting work on an indie film. And John actually is another one that's involved in the film festival world, although he's doing live action and he's sweeping, he's winning awards, like best film. Like I mean, he's just extraordinary. And he's this film, I don't know if I'm allowed to say the official title in case it's a Tim title. I better hold off, but it's largely a female crew and the cinematographer, the producer, and he's intentionally demonstrating the strength of women in film roles, and I can't think of enough of that. So that's kind of another example how these roles can change is people like John putting women in roles to showcase their abilities and talents and skills. So, but in terms of my next project, TBD.
TBD
I got
for your own.
yes, yes. I definitely need to make time to do it, but it's just not enough hours in the day. But I will.
Absolutely. Well, And maybe another podcast, I'll ask you about how you squeeze all of this in your time management philosophy. Um, in fact, do you have one? That how do you get all the work done that you have?
Actually, I do. I do two things. I make an overview of everything I want to do. I do like a weekly template every Sunday night. I map out what I want to get done in the week, and that's kind of an overview. And that I kind of keep myself, to that. I kind of look to that a lot for guidance of where I need to be when. But when it came to Sydney and Socket, this is actually a really good thing to talk about. I actually created. I get to produce it as well. I actually broke that, thanks to you, in your class. I actually broke it down into four distinct scenes. Okay. And because there were like three different locations, four different times of the day, but I broke it into four distinct scenes. And I actually created through your incredible spreadsheet a way to break it down on a shot level, scene level, and shot level. Everybody, he even had lenses cast in there. It was amazing. And then I actually would manage when I needed. I would put in my own delivery schedule. This is when I want to have the camera layout blocked out. This is when I want to start introducing lighting and doing first passes and in UVing and surfacing and doing all my look dev on the characters and then animating. First I blocked out, just they weren't even animating. They were just sitting there, as you remember. And they were all great shaded models just in place, just to kind of frame and compose each of the scenes. But anyways, I time boxed myself. I had a production schedule for myself, and I used to think that when I got to something that wasn't perfect, I'm like, okay, that's CBB, could be better. We'll come back, and I would move on. So I wanted to bring the project up to completion as a whole, and I didn't want to burn the clock on one little tiny detail. And that's something I learned from like Pamela Jarvis at Matte Painting, Pamela Hobbs, Pamela Jarvis, actually. That's something that she's just perfect. You kind of bring it up to a whole and you can refine it, add the detail and get to that granularity. And then you have a finished project. And they're all at the same level. So I time box myself, actually.
Amazing. Well, it's very cool to hear that you're consistent with your weekly planning, which is just about everybody that I've spoken to who does a lot, achieves a lot,
Mhm.
is prolific essentially, that has some form of that. They plan their time, they're intentional with their time essentially, because otherwise, funnily enough, things come in and take that time from you by the nature of having a hole that will be filled usually by someone else's to-do list and not your own. So I think it's really, really cool to hear that you have that practice, and also thank you for using the resource in the course. Not everybody does, but it really, really is a great thing to do, to just plan
100%.
everything and have that having a producer's mindset, even if
I
you're
do.
an artist and not a producer. Producing yourself, I always tell people, is a great way to have your producer really love you, because you kind of like do a lot of what they do,
Mhm.
running around and chasing people for, and they remember you for that. They remember you for being on your stuff and getting it done. And it's like that's the kind of stuff that will keep getting you hired as well.
Yeah, I actually have to say, I had to do that also because of working. That was kind of coming from having worked in post, where with the post group, where I was doing all those 3D animated instruments, and I needed to know I didn't have an Ethernet. I didn't have a network of amazing computers. I was actually using SneakerNet back then, but that level of meticulous organization was kind of burned into me then. Then when you fast forward to Sydney and Socket, and I was working on the center grid. I want to give those folks a tremendous amount of gratitude and collaboration to the. I mean, thanks to them, because for those that didn't know, I was using these cloud workstations and working on Unreal with the center grid workstation. And this virtual workstation was incredible. But I had three of them going. So not only did I have three Unreal scenes, and I was like rendering out parts of it, and I was just using Lumen. I wasn't getting it into the path tracer stuff. I didn't have time for that. I wanted to go down that path, and if I had more time, I would. But that was the level of organization I needed to have. I kept a running to-do list kind of all the time, and I love. There's something about the brain that it loves a sense of completion, that you can do that strike through, done, you can move on. And I had it color coded that if it could be better, I would come back to it. And some of the stuff I did.
Fantastic. Well, you definitely took the right approach there, and getting through the whole thing, going back and iterating it, and that's the that's a great way to make sure that you actually get it done, but then also looking at everything with perspective and figuring out where you're going to get your biggest bang for buck after that. I and it shows in the movie. I appreciate you sharing that because while it's not the thing that every artist dreams of doing, it actually one of the things that makes the biggest difference in your work, like is taking some of that organizational and more of the like soft skills and being kind and organizing yourself like
Mhm.
that stuff is some of the greatest stuff you could do in this industry. So very cool to hear about it in more detail. I have
Yeah.
one more question um, before we wrap today, if that's okay.
Sure, of course.
Um, somebody asked any advice for young filmmakers, and I will add to that maybe a flavor of, especially today, because today is a different day than we've ever seen before, and the industry's evolved a lot over the years, and it's currently in an interesting state. But with that, yeah, any advice for young filmmakers?
Your imagination is your only limitation, and you will find the tools that you need to tell your story. There is going to be a palette of opportunities to how you can tell that story. My advice would be take internships, study great artists, be an apprentice from at different stages. There might be something you're on set and you're doing something you're like, wow, I never knew I would want to be interested in being a camera person. That's if you just to kind of figure out which roles you want to go into. But if you have your own project that you would like to make, my advice is take a class like CG Pro. Learn how to do. You will learn production from concept to completion in something like that, and create your own project, create your own story, something that maybe was a story you wrote down in school when you were little, and you can with something that you've held on to that was important to you. You now have many different tools to express it. And so take classes, I guess, to learn how to use these tools, and then put your imagination in a pixel form and create impactful content. Does that answer your question?
I think it was a great answer, and yeah, you're just highlighting the not just, but highlighting the experiential nature of this. I mention often my dream was to become an animator, and I actually got into the process of it. Found out I pushed myself for years trying to be a good animator, and became an okay animator, but really realized that I didn't actually like it. That's the main reason, the process of it. I love watching it, and I love doing it, but the character animation is extremely specific. You have to just
Mhm.
do that over and over again. But that helped me understand just doing it eventually that
Yeah.
there's things that you like and there's other things you like less, and that's great because we're all different. We should all be doing different things. But I think you highlighted that really well, and saying that it's very experiential and to just get started. I think a lot of people overthink things before they embark on a project or a journey or a career. Jump just doing is the best thing to do. Uh, yeah.
Yeah. And also, I want to add, ask questions. Like when you're on, if you do get a job and you're stuck, you know, you want to learn the skill set so you're not leaning on other people. But there's no such thing as a wrong question. You might be surprised. Others in the room may also have the same question, but they're afraid to say. And it just, for some reason, just made me think about. Can I share one little quick story?
Yes.
Okay. So one last quick story is when I was working at ILM and I was just starting to kind of pivot into working on the map painting crew on I think it was a Harry Potter movie. There was a new hire that had come on board, and we had this internal email alias group that like if you hit a rendering artifact or something that wasn't quite working, you could just toss a question like what I just said to the group. And I remember seeing her question. And I was kind of waiting. Anybody? I didn't know her. I was in a different building, and so I just picked up the phone and called her. I'm like, "Hey, my name's Jen McKnew, and I saw your question. Are you still getting that rendering artifact?" She's like, "Yeah, I haven't heard anything." I said, "Yeah, give me 5 minutes. I'll hop over there and I'll kick up my render." Went over there and we worked through it. We ended up being crewed on a lot of shows together, fixed and figure out the technical thing, and then it kind of back to where my dad said, going out of your way to help people. Like my dad would stay after work at um, at the Golden Gate Bridge. fast forward like 6 years here, 6 years later, and she hired me. She ended up being a supervisor at DreamWorks Animation. So you have no idea how helping people or asking questions, how it will come back to you. So yeah, that's just I just wanted to mention that. And that was Pamela Jarvis, by the way. So she ended up hiring me, and she's a brilliant person to work with.
Well, Jennifer, you've had some incredible advice for everybody throughout this podcast. I just want to, before we wrap, ask if there's anything else that you'd like to share, any place where people could follow your work, or anything else that you want to share with the community.
No, nothing specifically. Just yeah, nothing. You can go. You can actually share on if you want the link to Sydney and Socket to the world. That
Yeah,
and the more of the message we, I guess, is putting out there that we are better. There's a universal importance in connection, no matter what part of the world, who we are. We are more alike than not, and we need each other as a community.
wonderful note to end on. Jennifer, thank you so much for being with us today and
Oh,
sharing all of your experience and wisdom and passion. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day.
oh, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
You bet. Thank you. And thank you also to our wonderful audience. Thanks for being here and asking great questions. We appreciate you all for that. And 2 weeks' time, we'll have another podcast. So look forward to that. We also, as I said, have the open day on September 10th with the Beetlejuice theme. And next Sunday, this Sunday, Unreal for Filmmakers starts. So if anyone's interested in jumping on board with that rocket ship and making a film like Jennifer, then come and join us. It's a great group. We have an amazing cohort lining up, and it's all live and great community to be a part of and make something and learn a lot. So thank you again. Come and join us in our free Facebook group or in at becomecgpro.com or in our inner circle or in the Unreal for Filmmakers course. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks. Take care, everybody. Go out there and make great stuff.